This is Franklin Rye, and welcome back to Political Spirits, the podcast that stands for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. There's no need to compromise. If the discussion causes us to change our positions or just tweak them a bit, that's fine. If it doesn't, that's fine too. The point is that we need to talk to each other so that as Americans we understand what we think. In that way we can unify through speech. And even if things get a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, the obvious subject is the results of the midterm elections. As a relatively conservative Republican, I must say they were a bit like splitting a doubleheader. I predicted that the Republicans would win the Senate and add 3 to 5 senators. At this point, the Republicans have 3, and it looks like we can't reach 5 because of Tester's win in Montana. Moreover, the Arizona count is not over, and it looks like Sinema might win. I'm not saying that McSally was a great candidate, although she certainly deserves our great respect for her bravery in military service. But it really is shocking to me that Sinema might win, even though she was involved with a left-wing group that listed her as its contact for a rally which was promoted using flyers depicting American soldiers as frightening skeletons. And even though she insulted her own state at an event just 8 years ago by referring to it as the meth lab of democracy, and even though she insulted stay-at-home mothers by saying, quote, "These women who act like staying at home, leeching off their husbands, boyfriends, and just cashing the checks is some sort of feminism because they're choosing to live like that. That's bull. I mean, what are we really talking about here?" Close quote. She said that in 2006. It makes it all the more shocking to me that she may have won when her opponent is the first American woman to fly in combat. That woman, Martha McSally, piloted an A-10 attack aircraft on multiple missions over Afghanistan. So what does it take to fly an A-10? Well, consider this. The Gatling gun-style cannon on the front of the aircraft has a recoil significantly greater than one of the A-10's 2 engines. Because the gun is so powerful, they have to mount it off-center so that the firing barrel is always on the center line as the gun rotates. If they hadn't mounted it that way, the recoil is so powerful that it might throw the aircraft out of control. I don't know how to fly, but I really can't imagine flying a plane while being buffeted by the recoil of a gun that's substantially more powerful than one of the 2 engines on the plane. Now consider that she had to circle the battlefield in this slow-moving aircraft while still maintaining control when firing that cannon in support of our troops. Now think about the fact that if she had been shot down, she might have ended up in the hands of the Taliban. I don't even want to think about what might have happened then. That a woman like that, so deserving of our respect, honor, and gratitude, may have lost to a woman who was listed as the contact for and a member of a group which depicted our troops as basically skeletal monsters is deeply concerning. Have we really moved that far away from respect for our military? For our future, I certainly hope not. Recent news indicates that the 3-seat gain in the Senate for Republicans is at risk because of a recount in Florida. Incredibly, Broward County is still counting votes, having apparently discovered thousands long after they should have announced the total votes received. Similar events are happening in Palm Beach County. I wish I could say that I have no fear that laws will be broken at the county level. I am concerned. Rick Scott is as well, given that he has filed suit. We're going to have to wait and see what happens, but I'm not optimistic. So what will happen with the Democrats in control of the House? Well, it certainly will be a cable news channel's dream. There will no doubt be extensive investigations of the Trump administration. But the more they investigate, the more they run the risk of turning off the electorate. The Republicans went too far for the electorate with the investigations of the Clinton administration, and they paid dearly for it. Based on the noise we're hearing from potential Democratic House leadership, it seems that the Democrats may not have learned a lesson from what happened to the Republicans after they impeached Bill Clinton. Incredibly, the one exception might be Nancy Pelosi, who actually said that any move to impeach must be bipartisan. That took me by surprise. President Trump is making statements about unifying and working together. However, by the same token, he's also pushing proposals and executive orders sure to aggravate the Democrats. For example, he has stated that he will issue an order prohibiting applications for asylum from those who cross the U.S. border other than at an authorized port of entry. Don't expect the president to adopt a more centrist position. Remember, he's a negotiator. He will push further away from where his opponents want him to be, so that if there's an opportunity to negotiate later, he'll end up in a position that is closer to where he wanted to be to begin with. And whatever he chooses to do, expect much of the press to characterize it as an extremist or unprecedented or unpresidential move. Which brings me to my next topic. The behavior of CNN reporter Jim Acosta. On November 8, the White House suspended the White House Access Pass of CNN reporter Jim Acosta. The reason given for the suspension of the pass was that Acosta placed his hands on a young female White House employee who was trying to take the microphone from him after President Trump had said Acosta's turn was up. CNN disputed the claim of the White House that Acosta had placed his hands on the female White House employee. They also claimed that the video showing Acosta lowering his left hand onto the left arm and pushing it down from the microphone as she was attempting to take it from Acosta was altered. The fact of the matter is that Acosta did lower his left hand onto the reporter's left arm, and it appears, based on both the raw video and the one that CNN claims is altered, that by lowering his left hand onto the reporter's left arm, he pushed it down from the microphone she was attempting to take away from him. CNN disputed that he placed his hands on the White House aide, and multiple other news publications stated that they agreed with CNN's contention that he didn't place his hands on the aide. For example, MarketWatch.com agreed with CNN's characterization, even though MarketWatch.com actually posted the video, which clearly shows Acosta lowering his left hand onto the aide's left arm and pushing it down when she attempts to take their microphone out of his right hand. Acosta also turns his body to the right in an obvious attempt to prevent the White House employee from taking the microphone from him, after the president has said he is through with his questions. And Acosta incidentally had already asked 3 questions. This is just another instance of the news media behaving in such a way that it destroys its own credibility. The only reasonable argument that can be made that the White House was incorrect in stating that Acosta had placed his hands on the White House aide would be to say no, he only placed one hand on the White House aide, so the plural reference to hands was incorrect, and should have instead said that he placed his hand on the White House aide. But if CNN had said that, it would have shown the absurdity of its full-throated defense of Acosta. What is more disturbing is that the vast majority of media sites failed to point out that CNN's claim that the media statement was false was itself not true. When media outlets know that they can make false claims about a presidential administration that the vast majority of their brethren within the journalistic community dislike, and those brethren within the journalistic community will either fail to note the falsity of the media outlet's claim or not bother to mention it, those media outlets, such as CNN, will feel free to make such false statements in the future. The way this event should have been covered by a responsible media driven by a sense of its responsibility to speak truth to power, whether that power rests in the hands of an elected official's administration or in the hands of a fellow news organization, rather than a desire to undermine an administration and the will of the people who elected it, would have been the following. The news media should have pointed out that Jim Acosta did not ask questions, but rather made statements as if he were the one holding the press conference. Then, rather than asking one question, he asked a second and then a third, and then objected and tried to ask another question when Trump said he was done with Acosta's questions. Then the news media should have addressed what President Trump said in response to those questions, both content and tone, as well as any commentary they might choose to give about the content and tone of Jim Acosta's questions themselves. All of that is open to debate. That Jim Acosta tried to hog time in the press conference by asking multiple questions and refusing to stop when the president said he was done is not open to debate. That's what he did. If a news outlet wants to argue that Jim Acosta should be allowed to continue asking questions, thereby taking time from their own reporters to ask their questions, they're welcome to make that argument, but it's going to seem a bit strange. Moreover, and I'm going to be a bit blunt about this, who the hell does Jim Acosta think he is? He isn't the President of the United States. He isn't a member of the staff of the President of the United States. He was invited to come to the press conference by virtue of having been issued a press pass. If I'm invited to the White House for a tour or a meeting, and I'm told by the President that I have to stop talking so that somebody else can talk, or that I have to leave the building because they no longer want me there, I have two choices. Either do what he says or leave in handcuffs. Why the hell is it any different for Jim Acosta? Imagine for a moment if in the Obama administration a reporter had behaved as Jim Acosta behaved. Can you envision the widespread attacks on the Obama administration for not letting the reporter continue to ask as many questions as he wants? Can you envision the widespread criticism of the Obama administration if it revoked his press pass to the White House after the reporter refused to give up the microphone and instead turned his body away from the White House staffer trying to take it from him and pushed her arm down when she grabbed the microphone to take it from him? Not only would there not be widespread criticism of the Obama administration, but there would have been hell to pay for the reporter who conducted himself that way. We can all debate whether President Trump is too sensitive to criticism, or whether it would be better if he were to adopt a more conciliatory and less confrontational approach with the press. But frankly, the thing that I cannot imagine is really open to debate by reasonable people is that the press during this administration has engaged in a level of constant attack, criticism of, and outward disrespect for this president that is unprecedented, even when compared to that displayed for Nixon, Reagan, and George W. Bush. Go back and watch some of the videos of Sam Donaldson's confrontations with President Reagan. They're famous. And they've always been pointed to as the example of a reporter and a president repeatedly being at loggerheads. But there is nothing in those confrontations that comes close to the level of disrespect shown by Jim Acosta to President Trump. It's time for the rest of the media to recognize that fact, to look inward and think about what their role is supposed to be in society. They're supposed to keep us informed. Nobody named them as our betters to correct votes cast for candidates they didn't like. Donald Trump was elected the President of the United States. The press needs to accept it and treat him like the President of the United States. They never should have treated President Barack Obama in the worshipful manner in which they did. In all fairness, I suppose they should treat President Donald Trump in that same way. But I don't expect that, and it wouldn't really be best for the country. They simply need to treat him with respect and speak truth to power wherever that power may rest, rather than trying to undermine the results of elections with which they disagree. There has been a lot of talk in the last few years about people who feel entitled or who have a sense of entitlement. Well, I submit to you that White House reporters like Jim Acosta seem to think that they can visit the White House for press conferences, which incidentally this president conducts on a regular basis and for extremely long duration, taking far more questions than his predecessor. And Acosta seems to think that he can ask as many questions as he wants, do so in what I would describe as an obnoxious manner because they're not questions to begin with, but rather statements, and then try to physically prevent a White House aide from taking the microphone from him after he's asked multiple questions and the president has said he's done. That's about as good an example of someone with an entitled attitude as you'll ever find. Next topic. A relationship in government to which we should all look for inspiration. As we wind down from a very contentious midterm election, and as we look forward with excitement, frustration, fear, or disgust at what will likely be an incredibly contentious next 2 years of national politics, which may involve multiple new investigations and potential reactivations of old ones, and potential pursuit of impeachment if the Democrats haven't learned from the price paid by Republicans when they impeached President Clinton, some may wonder, where do we look for inspiration? The subtitle of this podcast is "The Left and the Right Should Have a Few Drinks and Talk." I know that I sometimes wonder whether that's a statement that describes some utopian future rather than something which really can happen in our society, which is so riven with political conflict. I know that I've run into plenty of people where if the discussion turns to politics and it becomes apparent that I'm a Republican, especially as a Republican who is not typically critical of President Trump, or it becomes apparent that I'm relatively conservative, or I even mention something that President Trump has done without immediately following the statement with a criticism of the president's action or statement, or God forbid, I actually make a statement in support of something the president has done, then I get a look of anger or shock or disgust. Less often, I actually get an angry response that makes some sort of substantive statement about the issue, but usually it's just a look of shock or disgust. That certainly doesn't bolster my confidence that currently in our society, the left and the right will actually have a few drinks and talk, as opposed to should have a few drinks and talk. Some of the people who have given me that look are ones who I have known for years. Some of them are extremely rational people. You would think that extremely rational people would realize that people don't agree on everything. You would think that extremely rational people would have a sense of the logic and arguments which support the political points of view which are different from their own. But that doesn't take into account the unfortunate ability, and in our society, tendency, to restrict yourself to news and opinion sources which support and agree with your own opinion. In other words, as I noted in Episode 2, Bursting the Bubble, it's easy to live in a bubble these days, never really understanding the what and why of the other side's political beliefs. Moreover, as some have observed, there is a fundamental difference between the way conservatives tend to view liberals and the way liberals tend to view conservatives. Conservatives tend to think that liberals are wrong. That is one of the reasons why conservatives so often want to engage in a debate regarding public policy issues. They figure they can change the liberals' minds. Unfortunately, liberals often think that conservatives are bad rather than just being wrong. If you think of another person as a bad person rather than one who has simply reached a conclusion with which you disagree, it isn't that hard to see why you would conclude that it's not worth talking to the person about their political views because they didn't reach them, in your opinion, because they made a mistake. In your view, they reached them because they're bad people. If the commentators who've made that point about the way liberals view conservatives are right, then it does in fact bode ill for our society. That is a dangerous view to hold, and it undermines our country's potential for future success. The problem is that the prime influencers who could change that attitude in our society, who could prompt an understanding on the left that conservatives aren't bad, they just hold different beliefs that the left thinks are wrong, are the news media, the entertainment media, college professors and administrators, and politicians on the left. For the most part, none of those groups have shown any interest in convincing the public on the left that conservatives are not bad people. In fact, within the entertainment media, we're bombarded with examples virtually every day of late-night hosts who purportedly have comedy shows, other TV and movie stars, and college professors and administrators basically calling conservatives evil. The number of times I hear about this happening in any given month is overwhelming. So where do we look for any encouraging developments that show there's a real movement from the media, academia, or the left in politics to try to deliver the message that those on the right are not bad people? They're just people with different opinions than those on the left. Well, you occasionally see a comment from a TV or movie actor that expresses such a view, or something like it. For example, immediately after President Trump's election, statements along those lines were made by movie stars including Jeff Bridges and Tom Hanks. Unfortunately, as the resistance movement built and as President Trump did not shy away from the blunt speaking and combativeness which is his trademark, those few celebrities tended to move back more to the liberal party line. I'm not saying they actually labeled all conservatives as bad people, but some did. One member of the academia who is not exactly on the left, but does label himself as a centrist and who has been expressing for quite some time the idea that universities need to advance a diversity of viewpoints and that the lack of such diversity is undermining numerous areas of study, is Jonathan Haidt, that's spelled H-A-I-D-T. He's a professor of ethical leadership at the NYU School of Business. He's also one of the more prominent members of the Heterodox Academy, which is an organization comprised of 2,300 professors and graduate students whose goal is to increase, quote, the quality of research and education in universities by increasing viewpoint diversity, mutual understanding, and constructive disagreement, close quote. Now that is a lofty and worthwhile goal. In fact, the mutual understanding and constructive disagreement references sound a whole lot like compromise is not a requirement, we just need to talk. The way he says it, though, sounds quite a bit more scholarly. I recommend you go to heterodoxacademy.org for some very well thought out articles, posts, and video. Will the goals of Heterodox Academy be fulfilled? For the future of our colleges and our country, I hope so. This past week, an unfortunate event reminded me of a relationship in government to which we can all look for inspiration. As I'm sure you've heard, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg fell and broke 3 of her ribs. As I was reading about what happened and her anticipated recovery, I was reminded of one of the more inspirational relationships I can think of in government in recent times. As just about everyone knows, Justice Ginsburg is one of the most liberal, perhaps the most liberal justice on the Supreme Court. As just about everyone also knows, Justice Antonin Scalia, who passed away in 2016, was perhaps the most conservative justice on the Supreme Court in recent memory. What many people don't know is that Justices Ginsburg and Scalia were best friends. In fact, Justice Ginsburg said that they were, quote, best buddies, close quote. As the Washington Post reported in its February 13, 2016 edition, in an article by Iron Carmen, Scalia was Ginsburg's preferred souvenir shopping partner on trips together, and they actually rode together on an elephant on a trip to India. As the author noted, Scalia rode up front on the elephant and asked Ginsburg regarding that decision, "What about feminism?" She replied it had to do with the distribution of weight. I love that response. As everyone knows, Justice Scalia was fairly portly, and Justice Ginsburg is diminutive to say the least. I sometimes picture her as an older version of Edna Mode from The Incredibles. No capes! I'll close on the subject with a quote from Justice Scalia from the Washington Post article. Quote, "If you can't disagree ardently with your colleagues about some issues of law, and yet personally still be friends, get another job for Pete's sake." Close quote. I'd like to take that sentiment a bit further. This is America. The whole point of a democracy, or in our case, a constitutional republic, is for the electorate's voice to determine how it is governed. To have your voice determine how you are governed presupposes that some thought has gone into what you say. You can't really have given it much thought if you haven't at least talked to the people who think differently from you, or at least read about it. So my take on Justice Scalia's quote is a somewhat broader one. If you can't disagree ardently with your fellow Americans about some issues of public policy and politics, and yet personally still be friends, find another country for Pete's sake. Let's hope that after hearing that, you don't drop this one to go find another podcast. I'll be back with another episode next week. Please join me by listening. Until then, be sure to tell your friends about Political Spirits. and follow me on Twitter at Franklin Rye. Like me on Facebook at Political Spirits. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.